Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a two-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.
Hey, good morning, my friends. It's a beautiful day here in Kingman, Arizona. It's kind of timely. We're going to be talking about Route 66 and road trips with Professor Peter Dedek. His book, Hip to the Trip, Route 66 Centennial Edition. I'm not sure how I missed the first edition. This is published by the University of New Mexico Press. Really, really well done. Very, very impressed with this. It's a great weekend to be talking about Route 66 and road trips. We're just finishing up the 37th annual Route 66 Route 66 fun run here in western Arizona, Kingman. As you can tell, I'm a bit punchy this morning. It was a pretty long and intense day, and probably the only bad part of yesterday was that there's never enough time to visit with good friends. And so many of friends from all over the country were here yesterday, and I only had a chance for the briefest of visits. But that's the downside. The good side is it was a pretty astounding event. I'll have a full blog post up on this about on the Jim Hinckley's America website soon. We'll be talking about and giving some credit where credit's due, talking about the fun run, the Route 66 Centennial. And I'll have some stuff up on Substack too, our new account. And before we get really started this morning, I want to bring you up to speed. This is going to probably be the closing chapter for Coffee with Jim. I'm still working on finding a suitable home. So please be patient, stay tuned, and we'll have a new home next week. I'm just not sure exactly where or how this is all going to play out yet. It's taken a little longer than I had anticipated to get this done. And so we're going to have to just go play it by ear and see what we can do. And we've got here, Mr. Peter, how are you this morning?
I'm all right. How are you?
You know, I am doing well. I probably have to be dead about a week to get it better than this. How are things for you in Texas?
Well, they're good. We just had rain, so we were having a drought, and now we aren't anymore.
Gosh,
So
we've been so bad dry out here. We're going to be hunting jerky instead of deer. It's bad.
Yeah, that's we were getting pretty close to that. And of course, we can't tolerate as much drought as you can, in terms of the trees start dying here if it gets too bad, But yeah, we've had a change, which has been welcome.
Well, I'll tell you, we may be a little bit more drought resistant, but when the cactus start curling up and turning black, you might have a serious issue.
Yeah. There's limits. So do you want to do this on the phone? I try.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and we can do this. We try to keep this as simple as we can, and Podbean's been giving me fits. We're having some issues. We're working on a new home for this program, and we got added incentive to do that because we were informed Podbean's going to be pretty much discontinuing in mid-May. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah, so another incentive. But we keep going. We're building a strong community here of people who are passionate about the American story and the Route 66 experience. I'm really proud to say this last month we've reached about 600,000 people. And I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how that happened. I usually just push buttons till something works or breaks.
Oh, that's great, though. Yeah, excellent.
This book of yours, Hip to the Trip, I'm really embarrassed to say I missed the first edition. I don't know how I did that, but this Route 66 Centennial edition is fantastic. I really am impressed with this.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. It follows the first edition, but I completely rewrote it. I was originally going to just update it, because the publisher, University of New Mexico Press had agreed to do a second edition, and then I started reading it, and I'm like, no, I wrote that over 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago, and I started, I've maybe grown a little bit as a writer in 19 years, so I'm like, I gotta rewrite the whole thing. So I mean, there's still parts of the old book in there, but it's been kind of reimagined in a lot of ways.
Well, everything changes, not only do your skills improve, but the world moves on, and that's really made evident on Route 66. The old road has changed dramatically in the last 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it has. Yeah. And also when I was reading the first edition, I saw World Wide Web being used. I'm like, oops, I guess I better change that. World Wide Web. But yeah, the road has changed a lot. I mean, I first traveled the whole road from Chicago to LA in 1998 because I was working on it was originally my doctoral dissertation, and then we traveled it again in the summer of 24, and yes, there are a lot of differences, some positive and some not so much, depending if you're in terms of the survival of the historic highway,
Yeah, it's really a cultural phenomenon, and as the society has changed in 15 years, the Route 66 community has changed as well. But that's been a big part of the Route 66 from its inception. It's really been kind of a mirror of societal evolution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has. I mean, and it has grown along with and changed along with America as a whole. I mean, when when it was active, it went through all the phases Route 66 went through were tied directly to history. I mean, going from the development of the automobile when the original the roads that Route 66 would replace were created back, like the Post Road and the old Old Trails Highway and all these old kind of auto trails. Cars were just kind of a luxury, back in 1905 and even 1910. But then by the 1920s, when Route 66 was created, and November 11th, 1926, when they created the old U.S. highway system, the car had become a big part of American life, and so Route 66 naturally became a part of the lives of everyone who wanted to travel, from Chicago to LA and all points in between. So then of course you had the Great Depression, and the refugees from Oklahoma and other sort of middle high plains states to California, and then World War II changes again, and then the 1950s and the baby boom and the Cold War, and then of course going into the 60s and 70s as the route started to decline and being replaced by interstates. So, and then of course the Route 66 comes back, and once they officially designate it as no longer a highway officially in 1985, that's when the Route 66 movement as a historic highway was really got underway, and as we know, that's gone through its own evolution.
The entire American story, even our prehistory, is manifest along Route 66. You'll find, of course, in New Mexico villages that are 400 or 500 years old, and we've got the future with the Historic Electric Vehicle Foundation's establishing the world's first EV museum here in Kingman on Route 66. But the highway is what's really, I think, made Route 66 truly unique. Of course, is the people, past and present. But it's that this road has always had the best press and publicity from its very inception, and I really think that's a lot of the popularity.
Yeah, that does. I mean, everything you've mentioned, really, because the history of Route 66 and the prehistory of Route 66 also, kind of started its road to fame, so to speak, because particularly in the Southwest, because the railroads, when they built the railroads in the late 1800s and through the region, they were just there to basically take people to California, but then the railroads started realizing, people who marketed the railroads started realizing, the Southern Pacific and the Santa Fe Railroad in particular, that there was something between, the East and the West, and it was, like Arizona and New Mexico, and they realized that there was, this history there and these landscapes that were clearly exotic and interesting, and so they started to market, the cultures and the ruins and the artifacts and the art of the indigenous cultures. And because they did that, they created an image, a popular image for the Southwest that certainly it has existed ever since. And so when Route 66, was created and designated, then a lot of tourists who took their cars had already heard about Route 66, and not so much Route 66 at that point, but more about New Mexico and Arizona, and the cowboy, the culture, the Native American culture, and the Spanish and Mexican culture that already existed there, and so they were drawn to the area, and so that really got Route 66. It's part of the reason why Route 66 stands out from other U.S. highways. I mean, it's not the longest U.S. highway. There's Route 30, there's Route 40. Those are highways that go across the entire continent from the East Coast to the West Coast. They have a following, but nothing like Route 66, because Route 66 has this prehistory, and then we talk about the designation when John Steinbeck called Route 66 the Mother Road. Yes. Was a big, kind of a big step, right? Because that book became very popular, and then the movie, which was, book was 38, the movie I think was 1940, and so that they became very popular very quickly. And then 1948, after World War II, you get your kicks on Route 66. Bobby Troop writes that, and that becomes very popular as a song. And then from then on, it's just the rest is history, as they say. Because then you get the television show in the early 60s, Route 66, with Todd and Buzz driving around their Corvette, and it became a critical part of American culture, particularly like American car culture, and the idea of freedom of travel and adventure, by that point. And so when they tried to close Route 66 or end it in the 80s, it just didn't end, right? Because it was too important by then.
Well, you had the dime novels of the 19th century, and then the Fred Harvey Enterprises started creating and marketing this romanticism of the West and Southwest, and the National Old Trails Road, just built on that. And then, of course, Route 66, and that's one reason Edsel Ford and Emily Post and a lot of these early travelers motored west, was that romanticism, that allure, if you will, and that definitely played into a big part of the Route 66 popularity. The modern era on Route 66, which you capture in this book as well, to me, that is a phenomenon that's just so difficult to wrap my head around. First of all, it's a road, for God's sakes, and it's a road that doesn't even officially exist, and yet it has an international fan club that's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I particularly 1998, but even a little bit also in 24 when I took the trip in 1998. And then again, I talked to people who were, tourists there, people who were visiting, and a lot of them were from like Europe. And back in 98, it was more like Germany and mostly Germany and Japan. But then more recently, it's a more broad range from a lot of even more diverse, countries, but Eastern Europe particularly. And I think from what they said, that, Route 66 represents kind of the America that they admire. It's the America that inspires them. The idea of freedom and the ability to direct your own life and to go out and find adventure, discover, essentially the American West, in your own car, on your own motorcycle, and also the idea of American independence, like family businesses and innovation, really means something to a lot of the people who come to see Route 66, and then there's also this kind of rebelliousness that's part of it, like this idea of like, sort of rogue, you get out on that road and you see the real people, the real country,
Well, that's an Easy Rider was filmed a lot on Route 66, and that was that rebellious nature. One of the damnedest things as far, and I when I speak on Route 66 and have these conversations, I can't help but I share this often, but I was speaking at the second European Route 66 Festival in Zlin, Czechia, a few years back. And this was so moving. I had a fella come up to me, and in his broken English, he was talking about growing up in a communist country behind the Iron Curtain, listening to Radio Free America, the song Get Your Kicks on Route 66, and watching bootleg copies of Easy Rider. And he said Route 66 specifically, and the Great American Road Trip, came to symbolize freedom for his generation like the Statue of Liberty had for a previous generation. And I found that just powerful, just very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about sort of the Cold War and like all the efforts the United States made to kind of ingratiate itself on country, on people, and like behind the Iron Curtain, and really maybe Route 66 had more influence than a lot of sort of these official efforts, right? Because it showed them an America that is beyond just sort of like the official kind of message, right? It shows America by real Americans, and kind of how what this country really means to us, in a different way than just kind of like Cold War propaganda. And I think it really did more to put to make them admire this country than it would have than many of the other efforts that were made.
Yeah, and that's one of the phenomena. I grew up on Route 66, and you've got to be about my age, right about 70, to have a connection to Route 66 when it was Route 66. And that's another part of this that's so fascinating. How many people that are 20, 30, 40, and 50 are caught up in the phenomenon of Route 66 as a catalyst for community revitalization, building a sense of community, historic preservation, and how passionate and dedicated some of these people are to a road that, like I say, that they really don't have a connection to. It's another fascinating aspect of this. And it's manifesting in some incredible restoration projects and in the launching of some interesting new businesses as well as historic preservation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that struck me. In 1998, we interviewed people from along the whole route, and most of the people we talked to were people who had experienced and had businesses on Route 66, like Lucille Hammond in Oklahoma, for example. She had been she was there during the Great Depression, and and gave the Okies gas, and traded chickens for car repairs and things like that. And a lot of the people we talked to, like Angel
Yeah.
Delgadillo, for example, he was in his barbershop, we went in and talked to him, so the experience we had then was talking to people who had created this community from the time Route 66 was it was the way to get to LA, and their experiences was not only of the road in its history, but also the road as its revival as a historic highway. But then in 24, when we went, I talked to like maybe two people, who really remembered the road, who were still running businesses, and everyone else were like the sons and daughters of these people, or just people who bought the business and just decided to start a Route 66, or not maybe continue a Route 66 business. And their point of view, they were just as enthusiastic, but yes, it's a different point of view now. It's history changes so much when it goes from living memory to kind of recorded memory,
Sure.
And it takes, it shifts people's perspective, and in some ways, it dilutes it, but in other ways, there's a different kind of, enthusiasm, more organized around kind of history and significance as of the highway itself, rather than necessarily its significance to an individual. Like this is what I remember. This is my role. It becomes a little more general. And it has become more general. And so it kind of changes the experience. I mean, it drastically changes the experience.
Well, Angel, but you mentioned Angel, he's still greeting visitors at his barber shop and still doing, he just celebrated his 99th birthday. When I talk to a lot of these groups and schools and different things, and people talk about an authentic Route 66 experience. That's not what people want. They don't want to travel the Mojave Desert without air conditioning, changing tires out in Amboy in July. They don't want to stay in motels where they give you a fan, and a radio. They want the perception of the authentic experience, but not the authentic experience. And that's one of the things that has changed with Route 66. But Route 66 has always been in a state of evolution. The Route 66 of 1960 was dramatically different from the culture and the roadside of 1930. And it continues to evolve.
Yeah. And, a lot of people I don't even really know how difficult it was to travel Route 66 in the 1930s or 40s or even the 50s, right? Yeah. We take all these these air conditioned cars and all the comfort for granted, I think. But I think there is a certain fascination about that experience, that certainly people who are perceive it or think about it, this idea of the hardship. It's been kind of compared to it's part of kind of the idea of pioneers, the idea of whether they're in covered wagons or whether they're driving Model A's or Model T's, and I think that there is, and there has been for a long time, certainly since the 50s, this sense of like, where, you're traveling the same path as these pioneers, and in some ways you're sort of a part of that, even today, a little bit, right? Kind of part of that idea of the pioneer experience, even if you're in a big pickup truck with all, with everything, the great suspension and the padded seats and the air conditioning and everything else. But I think that's part of the appeal of Route 66, and it was really emphasized back in the 50s and 60s when you had the Frontier City and the Museum of the Southwest, these places that people that emphasized, the back, Longhorn Ranch, the notion of Route 66 as this kind of pioneer trail, and that was part of the appeal, that drew tourists and still draws tourists to it today, I think.
The hokey roadside attractions, and there's new ones coming up like Uranus Fudge Company in Missouri. But as a kid, I remember all these old trading posts and hokey things along the road. A few have survived and done well, like the Jackrabbit Trading Post in Joseph City, Missouri, Arizona. That's been same family for like 70 years now. And that's a real time capsule. You find places like the Richardson Trading Company in Gallup, been in business since 1913. That's an original trading post, but that was kind of a rarity. Most of them were tourist traps built on giving people that romanticized image that they wanted and giving the kids the rubber tomahawks and all this other kitschy stuff.
Yeah, they played on kind of these popular notions of what Native Americans and Spanish history and that sort of thing. And I mean, and there were also a number of businesses that held over from the earlier period, from the railroad period, that sold like real Native American art. So there was that. But as you say, and the vast majority of people who drove Route 66 didn't go there to buy real art. They went there to usually just get from one place to another. But then they would encounter all these these roadside kind of tourist traps along the way, and it became part of their experience. I mean, I think the childhood experience is another aspect that really is important to the fame of Route 66. That people, remember and still remember, their childhood memories. And when you're a kid, like a tourist shop with a gas station and candy and and sodas or whatever after a long day in the car is a really memorable thing, or seeing the desert for the first time for someone from the east, or seeing the mountains, and so that road trip, or those road trips, depending on how often they experienced it, was really made an impression. And I think that's part of what that's certainly part of what the appeal is today, that people have this association with childhood. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about Route 66 is it has this interesting combination of like family memories and kind of this wholesome sort of family connection of like the family being together in their car and, really getting to know each other and experiencing an adventure together. But then it also has what we were talking about earlier, this kind of rebellious, kind of almost sort of subversive side to it, of motorcycles and people encountering people in the in truck stops or whatever, and this notion of like it's like this form of rebellion, this form of like individualism, rebellion, I think that's part of it's kind of part of the fascination and appeal, is that these two kind of meanings are, they operated back then and they still kind of exist side by side, so it gives it a really kind of rich, the highway, a really rich kind of, appeal, to people.
My childhood memories would be the subject of therapy. Probably my pa was always trying to bring things in under budget. When we were kids, he didn't have a lot of money, like a lot of folks. But we made our first trip west from Norfolk, Virginia, to Arizona, to Utah, following a lot of Route 66 in 1959. And he had bought a 49 or 50 Chevy convertible that had been underwater after a hurricane, and he got it cheap. The car had no top and no bottom. There was almost no floorboards and no top. That was another adventure. One of the great things about the Renaissance era that again mirrors our society, we're opening doors to discussing our history. As an example, with Route 66, when people talk about the glory days of Route 66, it depends, of course, on what color you were. Candace Taylor's done a tremendous job of documenting this era, the Green Book era, if you will, and how the Route 66 experience, the memories made were different based on your ethnicity.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the places that we, I have a postcard collection of thousands of Route 66 postcards, and literally like 99% of those places weren't even available to African Americans.
No.
They'd be afraid to walk in the door, and a lot of the majority of the counties that Route 66 went through the states were sundown counties, like you had, if you were not white, basically, you had to, sort of disappear, at dusk, right? So yeah, it's a mixed, it's a history that there are parallel histories going on here. That the nostalgia that a lot of white people feel is not the same as maybe the lack of nostalgia people from other groups feel. I think it's important to recognize that. I think that it doesn't mean that we can't love Route 66, and it doesn't mean that we can't celebrate it at all. But to recognize that, I think is important, and it also enriches our understanding of American history. To look at the experiences of different people and how they. I address that in the book. I want to work to address it, in a way to at least explain that, right? To explain the differences and to weave that into the narrative so that people who read the book get a more, a more realistic and balanced approach to the actual history. And I think that, there's a few of the motels, most of them aren't there anymore, but there are a number that were in the Green Books that I specifically have collected postcards from them, partly because of that, and so that there was this network that developed after they published the Green Books, and during the to the late 40s into the 50s when the book was widely circulated, that was this a different network, right? And it started to actually make the road more accessible to travelers, like African American travelers particularly.
Well, this part of our history is not pleasant, but the thing is, this is part of what makes America's story so inspirational. Is we look at this history and it shows how far we've evolved, how far we have to go. But that's part of the inspiration of the American story is our diversity and our growth. One of the things, and I'm always amazed. I'm smart enough to realize the more I learn, I realize how little I know. And late last year, I had Mr. Schmidt on as a guest. He's got a delightful book here today about Oklahoma ghost towns. And I was really surprised that there were some reverse sundown towns that were established by African Americans, run by African Americans, were largely African American communities, and they basically the reverse of sundown towns. Caucasian white people were not overly comfortable in town after dark. I found that to be a very unusual chapter that I was unfamiliar with.
Yeah, that's interesting. I imagine that most of them were freedmen's communities that were created after the Civil War,
yes,
right?
Yes.
That were places, they were refuges, really, right?
Yeah,
for the
exactly.
free people.
Yeah, the Route 66 trip today, and your book does a good job of blending the past and the present. I really like that because it's more than neon and tail fins. And that's something, and one reason I gravitated to your book too is that's something I'm really passionate about. We have a tendency to become myopic and just see neon and tail fins. And what you've done here is add depth and context to the adventure, to the story of Route 66. And it makes it more of a meat and potatoes kind of, when you take a road trip with a book like this, it has more depth to it. You have more of a realistic, multidimensional experience when you travel the road because of books like Hip to the Trip. I find that very refreshing.
Yeah. That's really the intent. That's really what I wanted to do, was to add depth to, because a lot of the kind of hype around Route 66 can be, sometimes it can be a little like shallow in the sense that, it's just this idea of Route 66. Well, Route 66 is cool, you know what I mean? And it is, but there's so much more to it, and there's so many ways that you can kind of get an insight into like what Route 66 is, what travel in the 20th century was, automobile travel, and what the experiences of the people who traveled. There's a few sites, and at the end of the book, in the conclusion, I go through a list of some of these sites, that ones that I visited, ones that have impressed, kind of like made an impression on me. But places like the Wagon Wheel Motel in Cuba,
yes.
Missouri. I stayed there, and it was just it was really, I mean, it wasn't only like just kind of going back in time, which it kind of was. I mean, there were literally people sitting around the fire talking to each other, you know, and it's the place is all these old stone buildings. It has an old stone gas station. And it has, you know, it's being run really essentially the same way it was run. It still has the neon sign. It's the way it's been run for decades and decades. And it was just like going in this little room with like a hardwood floor and like a little old-fashioned heater, and you know, and then walking around this place. It was just like, you know, it wasn't just looking at an old historic site. It was participating in it, you know. And I think that's really important, you know, that also like the Blue Swallow motels like that too. I stayed there a bunch of times, and you go there and you're sitting out in front of your room and you're talking to people, and you can't help but think like this has been going on here for, you know, almost 100 years. You know, people have been doing this, and it's so different from staying at like the, you know, the Holiday Inn Express or something, where you're just basically like in this kind of, you know, sterile environment, which, you know, it's comfortable and there's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't have the rich depth of these rare kind of sites on Route 66 that are still there that you can actually experience, you know, in America that doesn't exist anymore in most places, and also not only the architecture but the human element, you know, and talk to the person who owns the place, and you know, and I think that is part of the appeal. And I think that I just, and particularly writing the second edition, it really became like, you know, like apparent to me. I realized the importance of preserving the actual historical remnants of Route 66, because there's so much of this kind of, you know, sort of memorialization with the big shields you can drive through, and the, you know, the neon parks and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but it really doesn't have the depth and the, you know, the real value, I think, that the actual places do, like the, you know, the Blue Whale and Oklahoma, and, you know, and the whole town of Seligman in Arizona. You know, I mean, you know, and other, you know, so many other places as well that really, you know, you can't build something like that. You know, that was evolved over a long period of time, and there's still, you can still discover, you know, these historically, you can discover things, you can understand, you know, on a real, you know, gut level what history is, you know, like, you know, just like when saying at the Blue Swallow, you know, when it, you know, I got a little like I had some kind of allergy. And I just realized that, you know, this is an old building, and I'm having a slight allergy to the old, you know, the old building that I love so much, you know. But I mean, it's an authentic kind of experience, you know. It's like you're really, your body is literally responding to this historic environment, you know. And it's not just hype or marketing. You're actually, you know, or when the bathroom still had all the original tile, and you're like thinking, you know, how small everything was, and how people lived at a kind of a different scale back in the you know, it was built in 39, you know, things like that. You know, it's just things that people don't necessarily think of. They don't advertise it, but when you experience these places, you start to get this sense, you know, of history that is so, you know, I think it's just so meaningful and exciting, you know.
Well, this is, I think, the two factors that are really driving the Route 66 Renaissance. One is like you mentioned, sitting around the fire, those kind of things. We live in a very cold and impersonal world right now with all social media, and that you can reach people, but it's cold and impersonal. And this becomes a real, you know, you interact with people, you talk to people. And the other thing is the time capsule experience. Like you mentioned, the Blue Swallow Motel and some of these others. One that I really enjoy that he's done very well in Tucumcari is David Brenner, the Roadrunner Lodge Motel. He took, well, it was actually two properties. One side of the property was built in the 40s. Then they built onto it with a two-story complex in the 60s. And when he bought it, I wouldn't have peed on that building if it was on fire. It was in such deplorable condition. But he has had extreme attention to detail with creating an early 1960s experience. He's even got himself a dedicated little radio station that plays on radios in the room of 1960s radio programs, sports, commercials, you name it. He's really done a marvelous job, and then added, of course, the modern amenities that we've come to enjoy.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, you kind of have to do that, right? The modern amenities part. But yeah. I mean, it's kind of idea of kind of not only recreating sort of the building, what the building looked like, but yeah, recreating kind of the experience, or at least a version of the experience that can kind of give you a window into the past, and I guess a window into a past that like a distant past for young people, or a window to memories for older people, but yeah, I think that's really important. I think that, and I just believe that the preservation of what's left. I mean, so much has been lost along Route 66 for many reasons, but the preservation of this, it's like there's this kind of series of landmarks now that people travel to visit. Like the Tower Station in Shamrock, Texas, is an example. I mean, it's this amazing. It is literally a landmark.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That Art Deco building literally has a tower, and it was once a bus station, a cafe. And you go in there, and it's just like, not only do you go in and see this building, it's been wonderfully restored, you also get to talk to people. And I think that you mentioned like the internet, and I think, and social media and everything. And I think one of the things that one of the problems with that is that we tend to self-select into a particular group of people, or a particular kind of, like type of person that we identify with.
Sure.
And we can sometimes get so like, so involved in that, and start to believe that, well, other people that I don't necessarily agree with on all the things are just, who wants to talk to them, who, they're bad or whatever. But
right.
When you travel like Route 66 and you stay at some of these places and you go into some of these, historic sites, you end up interacting with lots of people, and you don't even necessarily know what their philosophy is.
No.
But you realize that it doesn't necessarily matter.
Exactly.
Like you can appreciate a person just for who they are, and have a lot of fun with them, and talk about all kinds of things. And it's not like you have to be in the same little, clique on Facebook or whatever, and I think
Sure.
that's so important, particularly at this point in history, that we learn to, we go out to places like Route 66 and start to experience places, people that we wouldn't necessarily find in our daily lives because of all this fragmentation due to, social media.
We've developed bubble worlds where we only associate with people who think like we do, and we flip through YouTube or news channels until we find a program that affirms what we believe instead of challenges us to think. And when you get out, I encourage people to discover America with road trips. That's another reason I really like your book. And the idea is to discover America with road trips. And Route 66 is a great example. We just finished up the Route 66 Fun Run. We're finishing up this weekend here, 37th event. Last night, I attended a wonderful concert downtown that was brought to Kingman by the Japanese Route 66 Association. We had a performer from Japan that is passionate about America, Route 66. He's an acclaimed performer. But just in the yesterday, the Fun Run, we had literally thousands of people here that traveled from all over the country, getting together for a dinner, interacting. We had members of the Japanese Route 66 Association. Later this morning, I'm doing a brunch program for a tour company from New Zealand that specializes in Route 66 tours. On Friday, I did a lunch for a tour company that specializes in Route 66 tours from Australia. And last week, I did one for the Czechoslovakian Route 66 Association. And the commonality is all these different people interacting and with a shared experience, and realizing that we have more in common than separates us. It's transformative.
Yeah, it's so important. And traveling in 24 on Route 66, I had that experience on a number of places, whether whether it was at a historic old, Route 66 business or a historic site, or just meeting people and realizing just how, like, a lot of the people who are at these little museums on Route 66 and some of the businesses, and what great people they are, and just kind of, and what a community they still have, even so long after, what has it been, over 40 years since Route 66 was decommissioned, and yet this community has evolved and still thrives. And people will say, like, well, have you talked to so and so, like 300 miles down the road in another state, and you should talk to them. Boy, they have a lot of really interesting things to say about Route 66.
Yeah.
And that is also value. So it's like the historic sites and the kind of more authentic sites, and then also the people, and that people are critical to this, because they're the ones that make the experience, meaningful,
Sure.
and
yeah, and Route 60, you can find this with any road trip. If you'll just take time to talk to people, sit at the diner and talk to the waitress, listen to stories. You find this everywhere, but Route 66 is a very unique animal because of the perception people have and the interaction. You'll find the most it's just really surprising. I had the opportunity some years ago. I was in a rainy January in a little town in Belgium, Ypres, Belgium, known for the World War I battles. And I was talking with a friend of mine that was the founder of the Dutch Route 66 Association. And we had a gentleman come over and introduce himself, start talking to us. He's a welder. And he knew Angel. He asked if Angel was still at his barber shop. Next thing you know, we're talking to a dozen people in Belgium on a rainy January night. We're talking about a shared experience on Route 66. It's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, the way it kind of brings people together, really is amazing. I mean, even like on the highway, like the Route 66 museum and is it Clinton, I think, and we just walking around this museum. Usually, you walk around a museum, you just kind of look at stuff and and go, and then this museum, no, not necessarily, because you get in a conversation with a person working behind the desk, and then you get in a conversation with other people in the museum, and you're sharing these, like your experiences. Well, where are you traveling? How long you've been on Route 66? It's somehow, Route 66 is an invitation, when you're on it to communicate with just total strangers and have fun conversations and meaningful conversations with people that you would never normally meet, and I mean, that's I think that has been going on since, certainly since 1926, but probably before that, that kind of level of kind of conviviality, on Route 66 is, I think, part of the reason we care about it, and we remember it.
Peter, I want to thank you for taking time this morning, and hope we didn't frustrate you too much. I'm modern Amish. I have trouble with tech, so I try to keep this as stress-free. But since we're talking about tech, I don't think there's such a thing as being stress-free. But I want to thank you for taking time this morning to do this. But I want to thank you for this book. This is a book, and it's going to be ordered through University of New Mexico Press and Amazon, I assume.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's on most of the those sites.
Yeah, very good. I have enjoyed our conversation very, very much. I looked forward to this because I liked your insight and the way you approached this, showing that Route 66 is truly an American experience. But you add such depth and context to a Route 66 road trip with your book, and it's greatly appreciated. And as we approach the centennial, getting into centennial year, everything's being just flooded with Route 66 books and articles. And unfortunately, it takes 5 minutes to realize how much AI content is here. And the people, if they have traveled Route 66, that they've done it on the interstate and they've got off at the exits, and had coffee at Denny's. They have not really had a Route 66 experience.
Yeah, the experience is what's important. You know, I mean, it's the Route 66 shield is a nice icon. That's cool, and the idea of Route 66. But really, it's the getting off the. I mean, the whole point of Route 66, right, is getting off the interstate, going through a town that you've never heard of, and maybe stopping and seeing something you didn't expect, and meeting someone you didn't expect to talk to, and seeing a glimpse into an America that no longer exists, from like almost 100 years ago now, right? From 100 years ago on November 11th, that Route 66 was designated. So, yeah, exactly. Like it's I guess in some ways maybe just the kind of hype about Route 66 brings people in, and maybe if they linger a while, then they'll get the real value of Route 66, which is the history, the people, the experience, the discovery, that happens on that road all the time.
Yeah, it's definitely getting out of your bubble and doing things. And I'm so blessed to be living here in a Route 66 community and working with people. I meet some of the most amazing and inspirational people traveling this road. And there's the other part of this I like is that the people I meet, there's a fine line between adventuresome, nostalgia-driven people and just people who are just a tad bit off center. It's the road of dreams, but I've met World War II veterans traveling the road on restored Harley Davidsons. I've met people who shipped their BMW Izettas from Europe to drive Route 66. People celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary with the same car that they had when they got married. It's just, it's phenomenal. This road is just absolutely amazing.
It just brings out so much creativity in people, like this, that enthusiasm and creativity that we certainly, I think as a world and as a country really could use, right
yes,
now.
Yes.
And in the real world, not on a screen, the screen might be introduced to you Route 66, but once you get out there in the real world, then that can be life changing, I think.
Yeah, the screen is okay. It'll introduce you to this, but it's not. You got to experience this. And I'm only half joking that Route 66 is the gateway drug. Once you get out there and start discovering America through road trips, it does become transformative, and you start wondering what you can find on US 6, US 50, US 12. You start wondering what other things are out there and other stories, other people that you can be inspired by.
Yeah, one highway that I've been on is the US 50, the loneliest highway in America,
Yes.
across Nevada. Yeah,
Yes.
That's a great one. That really is an experience you don't forget. It's these remote places, and it's really interesting.
One of the things I like to see, and see, and I enjoy myself, is when you do the road in a vintage car. I admire a good street rod, but when you really take to the road in a vintage car, that becomes as close to time travel as you're going to get. And I find people doing the road in Model A Fords, Model T Fords, all kinds of vintage vehicles. And that becomes another layer to the story.
Talk about an adventure, right? You imagine doing it in a Model A or a Model T. I've seen people doing that, on Route 66. That's a dream for the brave, or the hardy. But it sounds great,
There's some interesting fellows. There's a excellent author in your neck of the woods there in Texas. I shouldn't say your neck of the woods. Texas is a little bigger than that. But Dr. T. Lindsay Baker has written a couple of very good books. He and his wife, they have newer cars, but Model A Fords, they have two. And that's been a big part of their transportation. And when Dr. Baker was doing research for his book on Route 66 a few years ago, he drove his 1929 Ford Woody wagon from Texas to Chicago, did Route 66. And he's had this car for like 40 years, 45 years. And he regularly drives cross country. In fact, the Route 66 Centennial Caravan kicks off next month from Santa Monica. And he's driving his Model A Woody from Texas to Santa Monica and picking up Route 66 and heading for Chicago.
Wow, yeah. I've met him and talked to him, and yeah, that was one of the things that when I was talking to him, I remember distinctly him talking about, the experience and what the experience for and some of his drives, right? But also the experience of what it was for people back then with these old cars,
Sure.
To remember what how different it was now, with
Yeah.
the flat tires and everything else, and I was actually in the process of writing the second edition, and it helped to kind of ground me a little bit when I talked to him about these things, like it's not, it's our view of history. We tend to be kind of presentists in the sense that we take so much for granted, but that experience, when you're out there and it's it's hot, and we were driving in the summer in 24, so it was, you're like, oh my God, can you imagine being out here in one of those cars, whether it's and this today or back 100 years ago, what it was like, because you're just you're at the mercy of the elements. One of the people I talked to was out in Western Arizona, was Scott Yellowhorse.
Yeah.
And he emphasized that about the hardships of what it was like, particularly in the arid West, to travel. And how you literally are depending on your canteen full of water and and the bag of water you have in case your radiator goes, and how different that what that tells us about history.
Well, Peter, I'll let you run this morning, but I want to really thank you for taking time for your schedule this morning, and I want to thank you for your dedication to this book. This is I think this is a valued contribution to the preservation and the continuance of the Route 66 experience. So I want to thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, and I'm glad you enjoyed the book, and I enjoyed writing it, and it's been fun talking with you.
Thank you, sir. We'll talk again. I think you and I have a lot to talk about. I will get this published later this afternoon, and I will include a link for ordering the book. And I have a review of the book up on Substack this week as well. And I'll include information about this in a blog post on our website this week as well.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's great.
Yeah, you betcha, Peter. You betcha.
All right. Well, let me know if you want to, anything, if you want to talk more or,
yes,
or
I do.
Whatever I can help you with, let me know.
Sounds good. I'll be in touch, sir.
All right. Great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
My friends, I enjoyed that a lot, and I enjoyed this book, Hip to the Trip. Excellent. I highly recommend that. Hey, I'm going to have to go. I'm going to cut this short. I'm off for, I've got a breakfast program this morning with Gilligan's Route 66 Tours, Sam Murray, and a great group of Route 66 enthusiasts who are traveling the road from New Zealand. That's on one of my projects today, but I'll get this published this afternoon. So, Coffee with Jim, where do we go from here? That is a damn good question. I have been busier than a one-legged man in a behind kicking contest, and I had not been able to dedicate the time I had wanted to getting the program up. I have till May 18th before Podbean pulls the plug on us. So I am really, really hoping to have something. We will have a program next week. So all I can tell you is stay tuned. We will have a program. We will be starting a new chapter in the Route 66 story. Meanwhile, I want to thank everybody who's been part of this, who shared the adventure with Coffee with Jim and the Jim Hinckley's America adventure in general. And it's greatly appreciated. But the adventure is just getting started. We're just going to be writing some new chapters. Meanwhile, I'll let you have some music here from Joe and Woody and the boys of the road crew. Something else I'll have up this week as soon as I can. I will get some information about the 37th annual Route 66 Fun Run, which we're wrapping up here in Kingman. It was an epic celebration all the way across the board. I think you're going to be impressed with some of the things that happened. Might even inspire a road trip or two. My friends, until we meet again, I will bid you adios with a little bit from my friends Joe and Woody and, well, the boys of the road crew at roadcrew66.com. And until we meet again, my friends, vaya con Dios.
Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a 2-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.